Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Kindly support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making such audiobooks for you. The Muslim Conquest of Persia by Lieutenant General A.I. Akram. This book tells in detail about the Arab conquest of Persia, also known as the Arab conquest of Iran, during the Rashidun Caliphate from 633 to 654 AD. This conquest brought the fall of the Sassanid Empire, which was in power for over 4 centuries, while rivaling its neighbor, the Eastern Roman Empire of Byzantine. Start of Chapter 2. The Change of Command. Early in June 634, Khalid set off from Hira with 9,000 men on his march to Syria to take command of the Muslim front against Rome. Muthanna accompanied him along the caravan route up to Qurakir in western Iraq, whence Khalid would strike out across the desert in a perilous march to keep his rendezvous with destiny. At Qurakir, Muthanna bade farewell to his beloved commander-in-chief. As they shook hands, Khalid said, "Return to your command. May Allah bless you, and raid as you please." These two magnificent soldiers, who held each other in affection and professional esteem, did not know that they would never see each other again. Muthanna returned to Hira. He was now the Muslim commander-in-chief in Iraq and responsible for the defense of southwestern Iraq against the Persian Empire. So far he had served as a subordinate general, albeit the fiercest and most dashing one, under a military genius who, with 18,000 men, had humbled the empire of the Khusraws and knocked the stuffing out of its armies in several bloody battles. But now he was on his own with 9,000 men, a larger force than he had ever commanded, yet a very small one to carry out the task assigned to him. Calmly, Muthanna surveyed the strategic situation. Khalid had occupied the region along the Euphrates from below Anbar to about Samawa. He had placed garrisons on the east side of the Euphrates, which in turn had sent outposts in the land between the rivers, and he had raided up to the Tigris, which the Persians had grudgingly acknowledged as their military boundary with the Muslims. No Persian garrison remained west of the Tigris, but the southern part of Iraq, the area around Uballa, which Khalid had occupied in his very first move from Arabia, had been abandoned by the Muslims because in the later part of Khalid's campaign, with a shift in emphasis to the Euphrates, it had lost its strategical importance. The Persians would no doubt take the offensive against the reduced Muslim army, and if Muthanna remained on the defensive and awaited the Persian attack, his chances of holding on to Iraq would be slim indeed. Muthanna decided that the best policy was to maintain the psychological ascendancy which the Muslims had gained over the Persians and keep them on the defensive. He increased the violence of the raiding, and his column struck in the vicinity of Anbar and Ctesiphon, and penetrated north of Ctesiphon and as far east as Kaskar on the Tigris. And Muthanna awaited with confidence the next Persian move, which he knew would come. He was like a leopard worrying an ailing elephant, and wondering what the elephant would do when he got well again. The next Persian move was not long in coming. The news of Khalid's departure for Syria spread rapidly in the empire, and was received first with relief, then with jubilation, by all Persians. The most terrible invader of the empire was gone, and only half the Muslim army remained on Persian soil, under a general who had not been tested in high command. The Persians made the mistake of underestimating Muthanna, but the mistake was forgivable, and the Persians decided to act fast, because the raids were hurting and the empire was screaming for vengeance. There was nothing that they could do about the raids directly, for the Muslim raiders struck too rapidly and too unexpectedly to be forestalled or caught. The best course was to eliminate the base from which the raids originated, and in doing so, also destroy or expel the Muslim army from Persian territory. With this end in view, a new Persian army of 10,000 men was put together and placed under Hormuz, who was also given a war elephant. Hormuz was told to conquer Hira, and with this objective in mind, he set off from Ctesiphon. As Hormuz started his advance towards Hira, the Emperor Farrukhzad Khusro wrote to Muthanna, I have sent you an army from the most degraded of the Persians, the swineherds of keepers of hens. I shall fight you only with these. This letter is indicative of the arrogance and folly which frequently mark the political decline of empires. Farrukhzad was the last but one of the Sasani emperors, and had been crowned a year before as successor to Firoz of the Big Head. While only 2 or 3 weeks before, when Khalid was still in Iraq, the best of the Persians were afraid to face the Muslims in the field. Now the emperor wrote of sending against them an army of swineherds and keepers of hens. Surely you yourself are one of these too, replied Muthanna, who was the last man to be intimidated by such insulting threats. Either you are an oppressor, and that is evil for you and good for us, or you are a liar, and thus the most horrible in the sight of Allah. Praise be to Allah, who has reduced you to the level of swineherds and keepers of hens. The contents of Muthanna's letter were soon the property of all Ctesiphon, and the people in the capital wondered whether it was wise of their emperor to thus provoke a people whom the bravest of them had learned to treat with respect. But Muthanna was already on the march when he received and answered the threat of Farrukhzad, for hardly had the Persian army left Ctesiphon when the Muslim outposts informed their commander of the move. The Muslim move was faster than that of the Persians, and they arrived at Babylon shortly before their enemy. A mile beyond Babylon, Muthanna crossed a small river known as Sarat, now called Nahrun Nil, and deployed his army of about 8,000 men with the Hila branch of the Euphrates, covering his left flank. Here, safe against outflanking maneuvers, Muthanna awaited his adversary. The following day Hormuz appeared in sight and also arrayed his forces for battle, placing his one elephant in the center of the front rank. This was some time in late June or July 634, late Rabiul Akhir or early Jamadiul Awwal 13 Hijri. The two forces were fairly evenly matched, with the Persians a little superior in strength. The details of the Battle of Babylon are not known, but it is described as a violent one with both sides giving as well as they took. After the combat had proceeded for some time, 2 Muslim stalwarts were able to blind the elephant with javelins, and the infuriated beast, not knowing where it was going and what it was doing, rushed madly about the battlefield, scattering the soldiers and breaking up lines of battle. Apparently, it caused more confusion in the Persian ranks than in the Muslim, and as Muthanna increased the pressure of his attack, the Persian front broke. The defeated army retreated hastily from the battlefield and made its way back to Ctesiphon. The withdrawal appears to have been an orderly one, even though Muthanna followed the Persians up to their capital, harassing the retreat, before returning to reform his garrisons and outposts. This was Muthanna's first battle with the Persians since the departure of Khalid, and the Persians now knew that the new Muslim commander-in-chief was a man to be reckoned with. There were changes also in the higher political and military structure of Persia, the first of which related to an earlier event. 2 years before, the Princess Azarmituht, the second of two royal sisters, daughters of Khusro's Pervez, ascended the throne. She was one of the most beautiful women of Persia. Not many weeks had passed when the throne was coveted by one of the four satraps of Persia, Farrukh Hormuz, satrap of Khurasan. Seeking to gain with one stroke the satisfaction of supreme political power and the joys of love, he wrote to the new empress, "I am today the hero of the nation and the pillar of the Persian Empire. Marry me." Azermitucht responded with distaste to what she regarded as pure insolence, a subject proposing marriage to his sovereign. She was, however, clever enough to conceal her feelings, and wrote to him, "It is not permissible for a queen to marry, but should you wish to satisfy your desire for me, come to me at night." And she gave the night appointed for the romantic rendezvous. Delighted at the exciting prospect which the invitation of the lovely empress offered, Farrukh Hormuz journeyed to Ctesiphon. On the appointed night he came quietly to the palace, utterly unaware that he had a rendezvous not with love, but with death. Azarmitucht had given instructions to her captain of the guard to kill the impudent satrap as soon as he entered the palace. The following morning the corpse of Farrukh Hormuz was found lying in the courtyard of the palace. The news of his death and the manner in which he was killed spread in the capital, and it was not long before it reached the ears of the son of the late satrap, who had been left by his father as governor of Khurasan and the commander of the front against the Turks and Huns. This man was a distinguished general, a veteran of many campaigns, and swore to wreak vengeance on the empress for the murder of his father. He marched with an army to Ctesiphon. At the capital a short battle was fought with loyal troops, but their resistance was soon overcome, and the rebel general captured Ctesiphon, and with it the empress. On his orders the beauteous Azarmitucht was blinded, and a few days later killed. The general, supported by his troops, was now master of Persia. In course of time another puppet was placed on the throne, who found it safe not to challenge the authority of the general, and the general ruled Persia as the real power behind the throne, and directed the course of its armies as supreme commander. It was he who conducted the campaigns against Khalid, and although the Persian armies were decimated in battle, his direction of the war was flawless. This general was also a renowned astrologer, and would seek to discover in the movements of the stars the course of future events. Because of his supposed insight into things unseen and the chaotic conditions of the empire, one friend asked him confidentially, What draws you to this? You can see how things are. The general replied, The love of glory. The general's name was Rustam. An even bigger change which occurred related to the Persian throne and resulted from the Battle of Babylon. For the Muslims it was just another victory, but to the Persians it was more than another defeat. While they had acknowledged the superiority of Khalid's genius and bowed to the inevitability of his victories, it now appeared that even the successors of Khalid were cast in the same mold and would further humiliate the great empire. The Persians were a brave people and reacted with anger to this defeat. A clamor went up in Ctesiphon against the Emperor Farrukhzad, who was blamed for provoking the Muslims unnecessarily with his uncouth insults. The clamor turned to violence, and the emperor was killed. Once again the throne of Persia was vacant and awaited the next occupant. This time, however, it seemed that there was none available, because after the massacre of the princes by Shiruya, very few had been left who belonged to the ruling Sasani family. And these few had one by one ascended the throne, and had one by one been killed by a fickle court and a fickle people. But a vigorous search was nevertheless conducted, and it was not long before a prince of the royal blood was found living in obscurity in Estakhir or Persepolis. Yazdjurd, son of Shahryar, son of Khosrow's Pervez, a youth of 21, was brought to Ctesiphon and crowned. He was a fine young man who seemed to possess all the qualities of personality and character which the declining empire needed to arrest its decline. The Persians were filled with new hope. The young emperor, in spite of his ignorance of political matters and court protocol, or perhaps because of it, threw himself with vigor into state affairs and the reorganization of the military forces. Rustam remained commander-in-chief as before, for the Persians could not afford to lose the services of a man of such military talent and experience. But in his new relationship with the emperor, there was now a better balance between the army and the throne. The spirits of the Persians rose again. They looked upon Yazdjurd as a savior who would throw the invaders out of the empire, as many of his illustrious forebears had done. In any case, the martial quality of the Persian army and the Persian soldier was, and had always been high, for although the empire had declined politically, its military effectiveness had not declined. The Persian army, including its Arab auxiliaries, was the most formidable and most efficient military machine of the time. Led by experienced and dedicated veterans, it was a proud, sophisticated, and well-tried force which gloried in its past achievements and its present might. The Persian soldier was the best equipped warrior of his day. He wore a coat of mail or a breastplate. On his head rested a helmet of either chain mail or beaten mail. His forearms were covered by metal sleeves and his legs were protected by greaves, like leg guards covering the front part of the leg. He carried a spear, lance or javelin, a sword and either an axe or an iron mace, the last named being a favorite and much feared Persian weapon. He also carried 1 or 2 bows with 30 arrows and 2 spare bowstrings hanging from his helmet. Thus powerfully equipped and armed was the Persian soldier. Muthanna had always known that the resources of the Persian Empire were vast, and only needed an organizer to be tapped and channeled against the Muslims. He had always had apprehensions that someday the military equation would turn unfavorable to him, and his 9,000 troops. Now it appeared that his fears were coming true. The elephant which he had been worrying about seemed to be getting well again. Muthanna would need help. In the middle of August 634, middle of Jamadul Akhir 13 Hijri, he set off for Medina to seek reinforcements. End of chapter 2.